Today I am pleased to bring you the latest game that's graced my screen, as well as a follow-up to a previous video, Portal Prelude, but with RTX. Now, I don't have only good things to say about this game, but I do have a bit to talk about. So with that said, let's get started. My name is Dark Lord Elliot. Portal Original is a game I would say I know a lot about. Portal is also a game that has a very small but dedicated fan base for. There are mods on top of mods on top of mods for Portal. The latest mod for Portal is the official Portal with RTX, which is Portal but with ray tracing. This form of ray tracing is known as RTX Remix, which is one of the most demanding forms of ray tracing presently available. When I talked about Portal with RTX around half a year ago, my biggest complaints about the game were that, firstly, it couldn't realistically play as well as the original, even with me having an original NVIDIA brand 3080 10GB card, though this was intended for use with a new 4090. Since I still have that card, which doesn't add in fake frames, I guess that means I have to deal with some stuttering. Lovely. And secondly, the game was unstable as all hell. The game would even crash if you all tabbed out of it. That's pretty bad, though I do understand it's the first game of its kind. So I did and still do give it a break and only mention it in passing. That said, Portal Prelude with RTX you can alt-tab out of and it just reloads in when you want to, which is also pretty fast. The practical downside to this is that if you leave it for too long, the audio gets cut off completely. I'm not sure why. Now you may ask, why are you bringing up the predecessor when talking about the present game? Well, to remind you from where the project came and to tell you how it's going. Also to give some context of how the entire RTX Remix project is going from an outsider's point of view. PRTX is in the vein of evolutionary, not revolutionary, because it's taking what was great about Portal with RTX and making it even better. This is clearly visible in the fact that we don't really need the NVIDIA panel in the game anymore. Everything you'll likely need is in the base game now, which means you don't have to open a programmer tab to be able to set your graphics anymore. Of course, you can still access the NVIDIA control panel with Alt-X, but it isn't necessary for most users, other than to set the presets for your card. Right, so let's talk about the game itself before we get into performance. Portal Prelude was never my favorite mod for Portal, and certainly not the one I would have chosen for RTX Remix. That said, right out the gate, having started a new game, this looks and feels great, but there's one small issue.
And we can help you too, but keep it secret. We're not allowed to do so. We only help if you promise us a little reward. And I'm sure you know what I mean by reward.
Man, you're so gross. I think I hate you more every day.
Well,
And we can help you too, but keep it a secret. We're not supposed to.
You're required to remind you that cake will be served at the end of the test.
yeah, cake and a fucking party.
Why?
We are required to remind you that cake will be served at the end of the test.
Yeah, cake and a freaking party!
Yeah, see, this is a censored version of the game. Portal Prelude was always known for being the more M-rated prelude to Portal. But here in PRTX, you'll hear no swearing nor inappropriate jokes. I will admit this is probably to appease NVIDIA and the snowflakes more than anything else. I certainly can't see Valve saying Portal Prelude was too much, considering that's the same humor in Half-Life 2 and Left 4 Dead, although I don't deny that Portal is separate from either of those games. In my opinion, this is another victim of unnecessary censorship to add to the already packed wall. Sure would be a shame if the developers that unnecessarily censor their games got some distasteful uncensored pics in their inboxes. As well, an area in the game was extended to piss off the player base once again. In the segment between chambers 15 and 16, they add in this entirely unnecessary part where you have to dodge these ceiling segments to prevent them crushing you. As you might have guessed or already known, in the original, you just have to jump down into the maintenance area.
This place is not meant to be seen.
Aside from that, the voice acting in the game is no longer original, but is re-recorded. What they did say in PP original versus what they say now is roughly the same, but not quite what the original was. That said, the voice actors do sound good in that the original voice lines sound good, and the mastering sounds fine, and they deliver their lines well, but they don't really sound right. It's like the developers use people working on the project already, rather than bring in anyone that did any voice acting at all. Case in point, Eric and Peter are supposed to sound British, but they do not. At best, slightly British. Of course, none of this is surprising whatsoever. Game creators that censor and or alter the content of the games they make genuinely piss me off, especially when it's more work to censor the media. Correcting things is one thing, but I have the original Portal Prelude to compare it step by step. This is censorship, not correction. This game runs pretty well at 1440p most of the time, if you don't mind the odd drop frame. Keeping in mind that I have the game set to ultra performance and I have an RTX 3080 Founders Edition. I know drop frames are down to what's going on at a given point, but Portal Prelude RTX is very unsure of when that is. The game runs well in some decently demanding areas, but then tends to run like Cyberpunk on PS4 at launch in other not so demanding areas, or sometimes after you walk through a portal to somewhere as little as 20 feet away. Also, I found 4 new glitches in Portal because of this game. You can get stuck in a 45-degree slope by crouch jumping into it when there's a portal on it. Sometimes the buttons don't work. These things in that bastard part of Chamber 15 are now portalable, and on some walls, portals do not work at all. Now that's an amazing glitch, that one. One could even call it game-breaking. Of course, my main reason for wanting to see Portal Prelude with RTX isn't Portal Prelude, but is instead the other fan mods that are being ray traced. Don't get me wrong here, I do like Portal Prelude, but it isn't the best fan mod and certainly not my favorite. Indeed, Portal's Factum Solus, Rexara, Still Alive, Portal Pro, and even Gamma Energy now have RTX versions. This is amazing for the Portal modding community. Plus, 4 of that 5 are now on the better Portal Prelude RTX engine, which allows you to alt-tab out of the game. Now that's sick. Now, the ultimate downside to any of these mods is that if any one mod adds in something in the base game, there's a chance that it won't work properly on the new RTX engine. Case in point, the Combine texture from Portal Z 2020 Slice, which I featured last time. There's also this glass from Portal Gamma Energy, which turns an opaque white, although Portal Prelude RTX is still in very early days and will likely be improved to the point where these mods will be able to be as good as in the original game. Though that said, there's nothing stopping you from playing the original versions of any of these specific mods, or mods that don't have any ray tracing yet. Portal isn't one of those games that was made for an ancient operating system that nobody uses anymore. You can play the original on most anything up to a GTX 1080 Ti or 1660 or beyond. In fact, unless you have at least an RTX 2060, there's no way for you to actually experience this amazing real-time ray tracing on your system, so you'll have to play the original game's mods. In the past, a scene for a movie or game would be rendered or ray traced once for everyone. Now that same scene is rendered and ray traced thousands or millions of times on thousands of consoles and PCs for you, the player, in real time and you specifically. Take that for how you will. The other RTX modded games run about as well as you'd expect, but they all have the same overarching issue, the time they came out in. See, RTX Remix itself is so demanding that if you have a 3080, you're still on the bleeding edge of what you're trying to experience. That isn't to say that if you have a 3080, you should or should not play Portal with RTX or Portal Prelude RTX, but it is to say that this is so demanding that it begins to detract from the core gameplay of Portal itself. Portal relies on a frame rate of at least 60, but prefers to run at 300. So, with RTX Remix being one of the most demanding forms of real-time ray tracing, that frame rate will not be a solid 60 in most cases, unless you have at least a 30 series RTX card. All that is to say that the game is fundamentally harder than the original non-ray traced version of Portal. Playing through the other mods of Portal Prelude RTX, I can honestly say they look much better. And if that's what you're after, that's it, job well done. The minor glitches are just that. minor, not game-breaking, nor something that's meant to detract from the RTX experience. Of course, that said, it's no wonder that Factum Solus is the most glitchy fan mod, with the game engine adding so much more into it. There are bound to be glitches, and Factum Solus was ambitious even back then. Though to be completely fair, Factum Solus does run off the original Portal with RTX engine. And with that said, Portal Prelude RTX has yet to crash on me like Portal with RTX did, or really at all, aside from loading in maps that won't work properly with RTX. Again, this is still in such early days that I don't expect it to run anywhere near as good as Portal without RTX or the mods for it, which at the time of release, 2006, were on a modern engine. There's simply no comparison. There were a few mods that I wanted to see if I could get an RTX version working, so I tried just loading in some of the mods into PRTX. The results of this were fascinating to say the least. Blue Portals, which was the first one I tried, didn't work at all aside from just booting. No surprises there, Blue Portals adds in way too much to just drag and drop into RTX. Maybe if someone that actually mods Portal could have a look at this, a Blue Portals RTX could exist, at least on ModDB. Second was Hellchase Nailway, which booted, but it ended up booting up into Portal Prelude, which actually did surprise me. When I loaded into a Hellchase Nailway specific map, it just crashed. I admit, that one was my fault. When I loaded into specifically 5B, I did get this map to load, but it was unplayable due to the character model being in front of the camera. When I finally made it to the loading screen, it crashed to the desktop. Third, I tried Deep Chambers, which I guess I haven't actually played yet, because I don't remember anything of this mod. Deep Chambers worked, but it looks the same as it would in the original source engine, so there's nothing to comment on. The fourth I tried was Portal Memories. This one I didn't have high hopes for at all, much like Blue Portals, but surprise me again, it did. Portal Memories Chapter 2 only had two major glitches. The fire didn't load, and the fog effect glitched out on occasion. Ultimately, it was playable though, but with some very high quality ray tracing effects that definitely didn't match the game. The fifth mod I tried was Portal Unity, which wouldn't even really boot. Something on the main screen was preventing it from booting. The sixth and final mod I tried was Portal Shell's Legend. This one worked and had nice visuals to complement RTX Remix and actually played just fine. The main glitch was the same as in most fan mods. When you go through a portal, there's a chance that the physical body of Shell will pop out at you as you go through a portal. It's kind of creepy and there's no way I know of to fix it. It's really just a jump scare. Now, none of these mods will necessarily have better textures for Portal, nor will they be optimized for the RTX Remix engine. This is just what you can expect from taking a non-ray trace Portal mod and putting it into Portal Prelude with RTX. Nothing more, nothing less. I'm surprised any of them worked since I didn't change anything besides the gameinfo.ini file that they were reading into. This, if you recall, was not possible on Portal with RTX back in January 23, which I tried on numerous mods. One more thing I should mention, if you copy the original Portal with RTX maps into Portal Prelude RTX, you can play the original Portal with RTX on the better engine. However, with two huge caveats, one of which being you'll be without the iconic GLaDOS voice lines. The other, timing puzzles don't seem to work right. And while Portal Flash Map 4 is still glitched to hell, literally, you can mostly play the first three maps without issue. Some maps like City 23 and Mountain Story still don't work, probably due to them having outside areas, but that's not really surprising. All in all, this is better than what I expected, and I am really surprised by what is here. For what it's worth, I have to say that I'm quite sure that I'd sooner recommend Portal Prelude RTX to someone than not, assuming said person already had an adequate RTX card. If you don't, Portal or Portal Prelude with RTX still isn't worth outright buying an RTX card for, unless you can get it for a really good price. If you're planning on getting one, these are two free games that you can look at as incentives, but not the main reason for getting one. Still, the price for some moderately powerful cards has come down a lot in the past few months. Having said that, I also have an RTX 2060 in another computer that I've been working on to make it into my VR computer for my brother and I. Using the RTX 2060 and setting the graphics to medium, I get around 45 frames in Portal Prelude RTX, which is really nice. This proves that while not as powerful as the RTX 3080 in my main computer, this game is still plenty playable on the older card. Of course, I'd probably sooner get a reasonably long HDMI cable and run the display to that computer to capture the video, rather than to play Portal Prelude RTX on a 2060, especially when I have a 3080. PRTX is definitely a step in the right direction for the sake of RTX Remix. And, even better, now Portal Prelude is finally on Steam, just as the creators had always envisioned all those years ago. It just goes to show that if you're patient, eventually you can get what you want. Or perhaps it shows that maybe if a massive company that, due to corporatism, is too big to fail and happens to select the game you were modding and happens to select your mod 15 years after the fact, then you can luck your way into what you wanted then. Who knows? Still, what started as Steam Greenlight, maybe this will pave the way for the other Portal mods being added to Steam as well, which would be nice. Anyway, all that matters is that those who have an RTX card can enjoy this new RTX version of Portal. I have, and don't mind if I do. Dark Lord Elliot, we're done here. I tried everything I could think of to get those back, though in